Let's start this off right. I have some idea what I'm doing, but I'm still just winging it. Hello everybody, and welcome to Season 2 of the Berry Bus Road Trip. This has been a long time coming, and it's taken like this long to get to a point where I can finally tell this story for quite a few reasons. Firstly, you'll notice that I changed the green screen up a little bit. It's not as claustrophobic as it used to be. I know it's a little bland. I'm gonna get like, I don't know, maybe a plant or something in here, but for right now the stories are more important. And I can't use green plants for obvious reasons. The green screen will cut those leaves out. Before I begin this story, I gotta give you some context as to why I went on this road trip, which is kind of important for this story. A couple years ago, I made a video on psychedelics that was called Psychedelics: Why I Became Crazy. And when I made that video, there was this young lady who reached out to me and said that a lot of the ideas that I shared were up her vein, similar to what she had thought about without any psychedelic coercion. Her and I became friends pretty quickly, and over time we developed a bit of a relationship. And we wanted for a very long time to meet each other, but the problem was she lived in Maine. So it's like this Portland to Portland thing. It was all the way across the country, and I really very badly wanted to meet her. Well, it gets to a point, I get back from the first road trip with Trevin, and I'm working on my van, and she, month after month, is like, hey, why don't you take a road trip out to see me? You know, it's about time. We need to meet each other. Come to me. And I'd say, okay, well, I have this, this big swap that I want to do with the van. I want to change out the engine, the transmission, just rebuild this thing, and then I can, I'll know it's reliable. I can come to you. And she's like, okay, no worries. And I'd work on this project little by little, and she'd go, hey, is it ready? Is it ready? Come on, like, get over here. And eventually I was just like, you know what? Screw it. The van didn't break down all the way to Florida and back, so it'll probably be fine. So I took a couple weeks, I got everything set up in the van, I got my electric bike this time, and I headed out on the road. Now, last time I'd gone on this road trip, Trevin and I had gone in the winter, which was kind of nice because my van has a heater and we had like mummy sacks and blankets and everything. This time it was the summer. And I'm glad to get out of Oregon in the summer because generally we have like massive fires out here. You probably heard of the Alameda fire that hit us a couple years ago. The only problem is my van doesn't have AC. The first day, I'm trying to get to Nevada as fast as I possibly can, and my left arm had gotten sunburned from just sitting out of the window for a couple hours, which was nuts. It was so hot, what I did was anytime I found a stream, I would pull the van off to the side of the road, jump into the water, jump back into the van. I had all the windows rolled down, and that would be my AC until it couldn't sustain me anymore, and I found another water source. As I was heading towards Nevada, there was this long stretch of road that seemed to go on forever, and I looked down at my gas tank and I was like, okay, I'm pretty good, like I'm gonna be fine. But I see this old beat down gas station as I'm driving and I realize, okay, I'm not gonna stop there. But the sign after I passed it said next gas 100 miles, and I was like, ha, okay, well, I'm gonna have to stop at that next one. I drove for hours and I even got up to this ginormous like cliffside. It was gorgeous, and I don't know why I was so lazy that I didn't whip out my camera and take a video of this. It was just beautiful, but I stopped up there on the cliff's edge and I opened the back of my van and I ate food and I just watched the horizon. It was gorgeous. So I drive for a little longer and I finally get to this gas station. My van had made it 250 miles before it needed to be filled up. And honestly, you can go a little bit more than that, but that's kind of where I keep it just to be safe. So I pull up to this gas station and it's just this like little nothing thing out in the middle of nowhere, and the pumps are off. So I'm sitting there like, okay, so I'm just gonna have to sit here until morning, and it was hot. So I'm just like sitting there for a little bit, and this guy walks out of the shop and I said, hey, are you guys closed? And he goes, yeah, one sec though, I can go turn the pumps on. I was like, okay, that's great, thank you. I paid $90 to fill up my gas. It was like $8 a gallon. And I'm sitting there like, you guys are robbing me. And he goes, I know, we're the last gas station for another like 200 miles, so we rip everybody off. And I don't feel good about it. I'm not the owner. I'm like, well, goddamn. Okay, well, is there anything you can do for me? And he goes, we got a bar inside. And I was like, okay, what's the price on that? He's like, it's $12 a beer. And I'm like, no, screw that, okay? I decided that I wanted to drive at least another 30 minutes. It was only about 8 o'clock. So I made it to this place called Winnemucca. And Winnemucca was really gorgeous. The city was beautiful. There were nice houses all around, and I found this little spot. I went to freecampsites.net, and I found this little spot in the woods. There was just this packed forest full of trees, and I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. So I get into this forest, and this forest was like a parking lot. Like everywhere I went up this trail, there were people shoved in to every single spot. I mean, there are cars lined up next to each other on every like divot. So I pull in and I'm next to this little Prius. I'm like maybe 10 feet away from this car, you know? And so I cozy myself in, open up my windows, and I open up a can of soup, and I'm just eating the cold soup, right? So I'm sitting there for a little bit and something feels off. You know, like when the hair stands up on the back of your neck and just something doesn't seem right to you? I was having that feeling, and I didn't know what was going on. So I had brought my 9mm pistol with me just in case, you know, I'm like kind of worried about animals or something. And I just grab it and I load up the magazines and I set it next to me. I was like, you know, worst case, I don't know what this feeling is, but I'm gonna trust it. I'm here alone. I'm gonna trust this feeling. So I'm sitting there for a little bit, and I start to hear this grunting noise, this really low grunting noise, and this bipedal being walking around my van. What I thought in my head was someone doesn't like that I parked right next to them, so they're walking around my van and grunting, trying to scare me so that I'll get uncomfortable and leave, right? And I wasn't gonna have that, right? So I jump into the front seat, jump out of the driver's side door, and I'm looking around and I see the bushes rustle right in front of me. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of strange. That's a little weird. So I hop back in the van, I get back, and I sit in my spot, and I'm eating my soup, and I hear it again. I hear this walking around me. It sounds like a man, you know, walking around my van and grunting. And I'm like, okay, this is really strange. And then all of a sudden, from the car next to me, I hear an air horn go off a couple times. And now I'm pissed. I put my soup down, I get in the front seat, and I drive 20 minutes down this dirt trail. I just exit the situation. I was like, obviously he doesn't want me here. I don't want to be in this situation if he's like that aggressive about it. So I pull down the road, set myself in, and I get back in the back and I start eating my soup. So I'm sitting there eating my soup for a good maybe 10 minutes when all of a sudden I start to hear the walking and the grunting again. And at this point I'm like, okay, who would have followed me? You know, I'm starting to get like really annoyed, and I got my gun next to me. I'm like, this is a mistake. No one wants to do this, right? And so I jump up into the front and I flick the headlights, not my headlights, my floodlights on, and I'm looking around the van and I don't see anything. And I don't hear anything for a good 10 minutes after that. So I flick them off, I finish my soup, I close my windows, and I go to bed. The next morning, it really hit me. I start to realize that that was likely not a person. That was probably a bear had smelled the soup and decided that it was intrigued by that. So it was following me and walking around the van trying to figure out how to get my meal. And I feel stupid for having jumped out of the van the first time because I could have confronted this thing. From that point forward, I decided since I'm alone, I'm not going to spend my time in the woods. When I go to rest, I'm gonna go stealth camp in the city. So the next morning, I wake up at the crack of the sun. It was so hot, and I'm sitting there like, I have to do something about this heat. This is terrible. At this point in my journey, I'm 5 hours away from Utah, which is where one of my friends that I'm going to go meet lives. I'm sitting there driving for a little bit, and the drive wasn't very eventful. It was gorgeous, but it wasn't like nothing was really happening. There was one point though, I'm sitting there sweating profusely, and I thought my van was overheating, and I was freaking out a little bit. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to break down right now, you know? It turned out I had accidentally flicked my heater on. So not only is it like 80, 90 degrees outside, but I have the heater blowing on me, and it was making the engine seem like it was hot. I have this reader that's just, it has a bad ground, so whenever I turn on anything electrical, it like shoots up to like 200 degrees, but I know it's not. But I'm just sitting there like, oh my God, it's overheating, and I just accidentally flicked that on, so that was kind of dumb. So at about 5:40 p.m., I get to Nick's house, and I take my stuff and I pack it inside. We went to the mall, got some ramen, which was really nice, and then we went to a friend of ours named Benji. Benji had no idea that I was going to be there, so Nick called him and goes, hey, you want to go up to the school and go longboarding? And Benji's like, yeah, totally. And then I show up at the door, and he's like, Barry? So we go up to the school, and I've never really been a skateboarder, and I'm not really that balanced on longboards either. Like, they're easier for me, and they're easy enough. I'm not going to fall over, but I don't feel super secure. So I stand on this thing, and Nick just got this Labradoodle, and he hands me the leash real quick. He's going to pretend to tie his shoes. He hands me the leash. I'm on the board, and then Nick runs away and calls the dog. So I'm sitting there holding the dog, trying not to fall on this board, and this is the fastest I've ever gone on one of these things in my life. And I'm like, oh God, oh God, oh. Luckily, I didn't fall. I was like, okay, you know what? I got some confidence in me. We were longboarding around for a little bit up at the college in Logan, Utah. I think that's Utah State. Don't quote me on that. But we're boarding around for a little bit, and eventually there's this like large group of girls on the campus watching us do it, and I'm just like shoving myself down the road, and they start cheering. So I turn around and I'm like, that's the first time girls have ever cheered for me. And they start laughing, and right after that, I like trip on the board and fall over, and the board flies away, and they started cheering for me again. It was pretty funny. After that, we went back down to Nick's house, said our goodbyes to Benji, and we tucked in for the night. The next day wasn't too eventful. I brought my electric bike like I said, and so Nick actually bought my electric 2.0 from me last time he was here in Oregon, so he and I went on a bike ride for most of the day. Well, it wasn't until we got back in the evening when I realized that I'd left my bike charger at home. I'm sitting there like, oh my God, of all things, I can't charge this bike, and this is a bulky thing. Like, I'm not going to just sit there and let it be a waste in my van. Luckily enough, Nick had an address. So I called my mother and I said, hey, can you mail the bike charger to me? I'll just stay with Nick until that comes, and then that's when I'll shove off for the next little trip. And she goes, okay, that sounds perfect. So I had a good week and a half that I could just hang out with my buddy. And this guy's been my best friend since high school, so that was really cool. The next morning was also not as eventful. We just kind of went on walks and hung out for a little bit, rode our bikes around. There was a point where we actually went to Big J's, which if you've ever seen Napoleon Dynamite, there's this restaurant where Napoleon gets his tater tots from, and that was the restaurant that it was filmed in. The only thing was the original restaurant was demolished to make the road wider, and it was moved like 4 or 5 blocks down the road. So it's technically not the same building, but they still have all the signs like Napoleon Dynamite shot here. This is Big J's. And I'm like, okay, cool. No, that's pretty cool. So Nick and I are riding our bikes down the road for a little bit, and I see this guy riding the Electric XP, the original electric bike. And that intrigued me because I've only ridden the 2.0. So I start riding up to this guy, and I'm like, hey, dude, how's it going? The thing was, he was across the street, and he was wearing earbuds, so I couldn't get his attention. So I go to cross the street, and this old-ass dude, like, he's so far away from me in this mommy-mobile car, and he's driving slow. I am across the street before he would have even gotten close to me. But I get across the street, he stops in the middle of the road and shouts out, I almost hit you. I died laughing. I like literally was laughing in his face. He was so pissed for no reason, and I was just sitting there like, no, you didn't. You weren't even close. Like, what are you talking about? No, you didn't. I didn't say any of this, but I was just like in my head like, what are you freaking out for? Like, just go, leave, you know? So after the bike ride was done, we get back to Nick's house, and I'm noticing that my van is parked on the side of the street, and it's being cooked in the sun. And I've got like food in there, I've got ice in there. I was like, hey, Nick, can I like pull up into the yard and park like in your grass? Because then the house would shade me a little bit and block a lot of this. He goes, yeah, that would be fine. The only problem is we have this dead tree here. And I was like, okay, that's more than fine because I have a saw. So I go into my van, I take the saw, I cut the dead tree down, we toss it off to the side, and I spent 20 minutes and 8 tries trying to get my lunky ass van into this spot perfectly, right? So I finally, after 20 minutes, get it aligned. And then the neighbor walks out and she goes, hey, I have company coming over. Could you move your van just for today onto the street for us, because that's just gonna make it easier on us? And I'm like, sure. Awesome. I spent all that time. No, it's fine, okay, no worries. So I just pull it back, put it in the spot it was, and I baked the shit out of my van again. After that, we went into Nick's backyard and we started a fire. Nick's younger brother showed up, and I hadn't seen him since high school, and we're just sitting there sharing stories, telling jokes, having a great time. We, just hung out until maybe around 9:30 when everyone got up, we kicked the fire out, and we all went to bed. The next day, I got up and my buddy Nick had to go to work. He didn't have any idea that I was going to stay as long as I did, but he also told me, from the get-go, he had no problem with me staying for as long as I wanted to. The only thing is he would get off work around 5 o'clock, and I was more than fine with that. See, my friends out in Utah are Mormon, so they don't drink coffee, right? And I wanted a coffee, but I also didn't want to go to Starbucks, so I rode my bike down to this place called Smith's. I locked it up there, I went inside, and I bought myself this durable-looking coffee maker. It was a French press, which is exactly what I wanted, and I rode it back home, I made myself a sandwich, and I made myself some coffee, and I was just dicking around until 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock rolls around, Nick comes home, and he goes, the first thing he says, "Hey, what did I do to my hands?" I look down, and his hands are swollen. And I'm sitting there like, what the heck? We haven't even done anything. He goes, "I don't know what's going on, but I'm having an allergic reaction to something." He tells me this. He goes, "Last night I had a dream that I was scaling a mountain and some rocks had fallen and they crushed my hands. And when I woke up, my hands looked like this, and they've looked like this all day. They're actually getting worse." And I'm like, holy crap, dude, you got to figure out what you're allergic to. So we decided to get together and go to a store to get some Benadryl. And when we got back home, he goes, "My lips feel tingly." And I look over at him, and he has duck lips. The dude straight up looked like he went and got lip fillers. It was, I felt so bad because I could not stop laughing. It was the weirdest sight I've ever seen because it was perfect. The way his lips looked, they didn't just swell like a bee sting on one side. They were completely filled. It was nuts. So we decided to go on a walk. We took his dog out. We had ourselves a good time. And he was sitting there saying that he had this new spray that he had gotten for his dog, and he might be allergic to that. So I was like, okay, so what if we, just as a test, what if we take your shoe off, spray your foot with that, and then find out if that's what you're allergic to? And at the very least, to get a different product. And he's like, yeah, that sounds good. So the next morning, we wake up, and Nick's foot is totally fine. Nick goes to work, but when he got back, he said, "Hey, I called off work. I was hurting too much. I went to the doctor." I was like, okay, so what did the doctor say? He goes, "Doctor said that I'm allergic to something." Nice, doc. Great. Okay, thanks. Later in that day, Nick and I went down to the mailbox, and what we found was my charger had shown up early. So that meant that I was going to actually leave the next day. So Nick and I just hung out. We had ourselves a good time. We watched YouTube videos for a little bit, watched a little bit of one of his favorite animes. I said goodbye, and the next day, I shipped off. I had a real good time with my buddy Nick, but this is where the story starts, and I'm going to end it there today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I want to say this. If you thought the first road trip was interesting, this one is a wild roller coaster, and it has taken me this long before I've been able to share it. There's a reason for that. I haven't been making videos very often, but I'm going to try to make these as often as I possibly can. Again, thank you. And I'll see you next time.